The fire had long since died when Eowyn woke to the sound of iron scraping against stone. Her breath caught in the frozen air of the cellar chamber, a shallow gasp that clouded white before her face and vanished into the darkness. The cold had settled into her bones during the night, seeping through the thin wool blanket she clutched around her narrow shoulders. Above her, through the grated ceiling that separated the archive's lower vault from the keep's main floor, she could hear the heavy tread of boots. Guards. Always guards. She sat up slowly, her body protesting with the dull ache of old bruises and older hunger. 26 years she had lived in Blackmore Keep, and still, the stone walls felt like a prison dressed in the language of sanctuary. The Northern Highlands showed no mercy to the weak, and she had learned early that weakness was measured not in strength of arm, but in the accident of one's birth. Human. The word carried weight here, heavy as chains, cold as the winter wind that howled through the mountain passes. Eowyn had been 4 years old when they found her wandering the burnt remains of a village on the borderlands, her hands blackened with soot, her eyes empty of tears. The fever had taken her mother first, then her father 3 days later, their bodies wrapped in cloth and buried in shallow graves before the sickness could spread. She remembered almost nothing of that time except the smell of smoke and the terrible silence that followed. The villagers had blamed her family for bringing the plague, whispering that her mother had been a witch, that her father had trafficked with dark spirits. When the elders of the pack found her, she was alone among the ashes, clutching a book she could not yet read. Lord Cadmus, the Alpha King's chief counselor at the time, had been the one to bring her before the court. She still remembered the great hall, vast and cold, its walls lined with ancient weapons and the mounted heads of creatures she had no names for. King Aldric, Ryden's father, had sat upon the throne of fang and claw, his eyes like molten amber, his presence so overwhelming that Eowyn had collapsed to her knees without being told. The assembled wolves had stared at her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. A human child, orphaned, contaminated by death. It was the Queen, Leora Blackmore, who had spoken on her behalf. Eowyn did not remember the words, only the tone. Firm, unyielding, edged with something that might have been compassion or might simply have been royal decree. The Queen had declared that the child would be raised within the keep, educated and given purpose. Not as a servant, though she would serve. Not as pack, for she could never be. But as a keeper of knowledge, a recorder of law, a living reminder that mercy still existed within the stone halls of power. That had been 22 years ago. Queen Leora was dead now, taken by the same wasting sickness that had claimed Eowyn's own mother, as if death had a particular appetite for the women who dared to show kindness. King Aldric had followed his mate into the grave within the year, his heart broken, his wolf howling into the void until silence claimed him too. And Ryden, the crown prince who had been 19 when Eowyn first arrived, had ascended to the throne with a coldness that seemed to freeze the very air around him. Eowyn rose from her pallet and moved through the dim archive with the practiced ease of someone who had walked these paths in total darkness. The lower vault was her domain, a labyrinth of shelves carved directly into the mountain stone, lined with scrolls and bound volumes that chronicled 5 centuries of pack law, territorial disputes, lineage records, and the blood oaths that bound the northern packs to the Ironclaw throne. She lit a candle from the embers of last night's fire and carried it to her work table, where an unfinished transcription waited. The Law of Separation. She had been copying it for 3 days now, her hand cramping around the quill as she rendered the archaic script into clearer, more legible form. It was one of the oldest laws in the Codex, written in the blood of the first Alpha King and sealed with a curse that promised death to any who violated it. No bond shall be forged between human and wolf. No alpha shall take a human as mate. No crown shall rest upon a head that carries mortal blood unmixed with the gift of the moon. Let any who defy this law be cast into exile, their names struck from the record, their bloodline ended. Eowyn's hand trembled as she wrote. She had copied these words 100 times, had memorized them as a child, had recited them before the council when she was tested for her position. And yet, each time she set them to parchment, they felt heavier, more suffocating, as if the ink itself carried the weight of centuries of fear and control. She did not hear the door open. She only felt the change in the air, the way the temperature seemed to drop even further, the way her pulse quickened without her consent. She looked up. King Ryden Blackmore stood in the doorway of the vault, his massive frame filling the archway, his eyes reflecting the candlelight like a wolf's in the dark. He wore black, as he always did, the leather and fur of his attire reinforcing the image of a predator barely contained within human form. His hair, dark as midnight, was tied back from a face that might have been handsome if it were not so severe. He was 34 now, a decade on the throne, and every year had carved him harder, colder, more unyielding. Ellawen stood immediately, her head bowed, her hands clasped before her. "Your Majesty." He did not speak right away. He never did. Ryden was a man of silence, of long pauses that felt like examinations, as if he could see through flesh and bone to the truth beneath. When he finally moved, it was with the deliberate grace of a predator, crossing the vault to stand before her work table. His gaze fell to the open scroll, to the words she had been transcribing. "The law of separation," he said, his voice low and rough, like stone grinding against stone. "Yes, Your Majesty. The Council requested updated copies for the archives of each pack." "Did they?" It was not a question. Ryden reached out and traced one finger along the edge of the parchment, not touching the wet ink, but close enough that Ellawen held her breath. "Tell me, Ellawen, do you believe in this law?" The question struck her like a blow. In all the years she had served in the archive, in all the times Ryden had descended into the vault to consult the records, he had never asked her opinion. He had never asked her anything beyond the location of a specific document or the clarification of an obscure passage. She was a tool to him, she had always assumed. Useful, perhaps even valued in her way, but no more worthy of conversation than the shelves that held the books. She chose her words carefully. "I am not qualified to judge the laws of the pack, Your Majesty. I only record them. That is not what I asked." Ellawen lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time. It was a transgression. Humans did not look directly at the Alpha King, but something in his tone demanded honesty, and she found herself unable to look away. His eyes were gray, she realized. Not amber like his father's, but the gray of winter storms, of steel, of things that endured. "I believe," she said slowly, "that laws born of fear often outlive their purpose." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, something flickered in Ryden's expression, something that might have been surprise or approval, or something else entirely. He withdrew his hand from the parchment and straightened, towering over her. "You speak dangerously, Archivist." "You asked for truth, Your Majesty. I assumed you would accept no less." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to startle her. Then he turned and walked toward the shelves, his gaze scanning the spines of ancient volumes. "I came for the Treaty of Blood and Stone. The original, not the transcription." Ellawen moved past him, acutely aware of the space between their bodies, the way her shoulder nearly brushed his arm as she reached for the high shelf where the oldest treaties were kept. She had to stand on her toes to grasp the leather-bound volume, and as she pulled it free, she felt his hand steady her elbow, just for a moment, just long enough to keep her from stumbling. The touch burned. She handed him the volume quickly, stepping back, her heart pounding in her chest. Ryden took the book without comment, but his gaze lingered on her face, searching for something she did not understand. "You work too much," he said abruptly. "There are shadows beneath your eyes. The Council's requests are extensive, Your Majesty. The Council requests many things. That does not mean you must destroy yourself to fulfill them." He opened the treaty, scanning the pages with the focused intensity of a man who had been trained to see through lies and half-truths. "When did you last eat a full meal?" Ellawen blinked, caught off guard by the question. This morning, Your Majesty." Liar. The word was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Ellawen felt heat rise to her cheeks, shame and anger twisting together in her chest. She wanted to argue, to insist that she was fine, that she needed no one's concern, least of all his. But the truth was that food in the keep was distributed according to rank, and humans, even those who served the crown, ate last and least. She had learned long ago to make a single bowl of porridge last 2 days, to ignore the gnawing ache in her belly, to focus on her work until hunger became just another discomfort to be endured. "The rations are sufficient," she said stiffly. Ryden closed the book with a sharp snap that made her flinch. "I will speak to the steward. You will receive the same provisions as the scribes of the upper hall." "Your Majesty, that is not necessary. It is an order, Elowen. Do not argue with me." She fell silent, her jaw tight, her hands clenched at her sides. She hated this, hated the way his kindness, if it could even be called that, made her feel small and helpless, hated the way it reminded her that she existed entirely at the mercy of others. But she nodded, because what else could she do? Ryden studied her for another moment, then turned toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his back to her, his voice carrying across the vault. The law of separation was written by men who feared what they could not control. Remember that, when you copy it. Then he was gone, and Elowen was alone again in the cold and the candlelight, her hands still trembling, her mind racing with questions she did not dare to voice. The days that followed were marked by small, unsettling changes. The steward, a grizzled wolf named Torvin who had always regarded Elowen with barely concealed contempt, began delivering meals to the archive twice daily. The portions were generous, far more than she was accustomed to, and though Torvin said nothing, the tightness around his mouth suggested he was acting under orders he did not agree with. Elowen ate in silence, guilt and gratitude warring in her chest, and tried not to think about the king's words. Ryden himself did not return to the vault for nearly a week. When he did, it was late at night, long after the rest of the keep had settled into uneasy sleep. Elowen was still awake, bent over a particularly difficult translation, when she heard the door open. She looked up to find him standing in the shadows, still dressed in the formal attire of the council chamber, his expression unreadable. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you, Your Majesty." Another flicker of something that might have been amusement. "I do not rest easily." "Nor do I." He crossed to the work table and looked down at the text she was translating, a genealogical record tracing the bloodlines of the northern Pax back 7 generations. His eyes moved over the names, the dates, the notations of alliances and betrayals. "You have a gift for this work," he said quietly. "My father chose well when he gave you this position." "Your mother chose," Elowen corrected before she could stop herself. "Your father agreed." Ryden's gaze sharpened. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about that day." He was silent for a long moment, then reached out and turned the page, revealing a section that dealt with the mating bonds of the royal line. Elowen watched his finger trace down the entries, noting the careful annotations she had made regarding the traditional requirements for a bond to be recognized by the council. "Do you ever wonder," he said slowly, "what it would be like if these rules did not exist? If the laws were different?" Elowen's breath caught. "Your Majesty, answer me." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. This was dangerous ground, more dangerous than anything they had discussed before. To question the laws was one thing. To imagine a world without them was another entirely. "I think," she said carefully, "that the world would be chaos, or it would be free. I am not certain there is a difference." Ryden looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elowen felt something shift in the air between them. It was not attraction, not precisely, though there was an element of that. It was recognition, as if he saw in her the same restless questioning, the same bone-deep weariness of living within walls that could never be torn down. "You are wasted here," he said softly, "copying laws you do not believe in, serving a system that offers you nothing in return. I have a roof over my head, food, purpose. That is more than most humans can claim in the Highlands. It is survival, not life." "And what is life, Your Majesty, for someone like me?" He did not answer. Instead, he turned away, moving toward the shelves again, his hands clasped behind his back. "I am to be married," he said abruptly, "in 3 months' time, to Lady Seraphine Vexmore of the Bloodfen Pack. It is a political alliance, designed to secure the Eastern Territories and prevent another border war." Elawan felt something cold settle in her chest. She had heard rumors, of course. The entire keep had been buzzing with talk of the engagement for weeks, but hearing it from Ryden's own lips made it real in a way the gossip had not. "I see," she said quietly. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." "Do not congratulate me for doing my duty." The bitterness in his voice startled her. She looked up to find him staring at one of the ancient texts, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Lady Seraphine is intelligent, beautiful, and ambitious," he continued, his tone flat. "She will make an excellent queen. The council is pleased. The Pax are satisfied. And I will spend the rest of my life bound to a woman I do not love, producing heirs to continue a bloodline I am not certain deserves to continue. Your Majesty, I envy you." "Elowen." The words hung in the air like a blade. Elowen stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard. "You envy me?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am human. I am powerless. I exist at your mercy, and the mercy of every wolf in this keep. How could you possibly—" "Because you are free," Ryden said, turning to face her. "You owe nothing to the crown. You made no blood oaths. You swore no allegiance beyond the work you do. If you chose to leave tomorrow, to walk out of this keep and never return, no one could stop you. No prophecy binds you. No destiny was written in your blood before you were born. I would be dead within a week," Elowen said flatly. "A human woman alone in the Highlands? I would freeze or starve or be torn apart by rogues. This keep is not freedom, Your Majesty. It is a cage with the illusion of choice." Ryden flinched as if she had struck him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he moved closer, so close that Elowen could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the scent of leather and wood smoke, and something wilder, something that made her pulse quicken. "Then we are both prisoners," he said softly. "You to circumstance, I to duty, and neither of us can see a way out." Elowen looked up at him, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say, 1,000 questions she wanted to ask. But before she could speak, before she could even think, Ryden reached out and touched her face, his fingers brushing against her cheek with a gentleness that stole the air from her lungs. "I should not be here," he murmured. "I should not speak to you like this. I should not—" He trailed off, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, his eyes searching hers. And Elowen, who had spent her entire life learning to be invisible, to be silent, to be safe, found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes closing, her breath hitching. Then he pulled away, stepping back so quickly it was as if he had been burned. His expression shuddered, the coldness slamming back into place like a door closing. "Forgive me," he said, his voice harsh. "That was inappropriate. It will not happen again." He turned and strode toward the door, his movements stiff, controlled. Elowen stood frozen, her hand rising to touch the place where his fingers had been, her mind reeling. "Your Majesty," she called out, her voice cracking. He paused but did not turn. "Why did you come here tonight?" For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke. "Because you are the only person in this entire kingdom who does not lie to me." And then he was gone, leaving Elowen alone in the vault with her books and her questions, and the terrible, dawning realization that the King of Ironclaw was just as much a prisoner as she was. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in the rhythm of the keep. Preparations for the royal wedding consumed the attention of the court, transforming the cold stone halls into a flurry of activity. Seamstresses arrived from the southern territories, bearing bolts of silk and velvet. Merchants brought casks of wine and wheels of cheese, honeyed pastries and smoked meats, luxuries that seemed obscene against the backdrop of the harsh northern winter. The guards drilled longer hours, their formations precise, their armor polished to a mirror shine. Everything had to be perfect for the arrival of Lady Seraphine and her entourage. Elowen watched it all from a distance, her world narrowing back to the confines of the archive. She told herself it was better this way. Safer. The moment she had shared with Ryden in the vault had been an aberration, a crack in the carefully maintained walls that separated their worlds. It could not happen again. It must not. But the king seemed determined to test that resolve. He came to the archive more frequently now, always late at night, always alone. He would request a specific text or ask for clarification on some obscure point of law, but the pretense wore thin quickly. They would talk about history, about the politics of the Pax, about the weight of legacy and the burden of expectation. Ryden spoke to her as he spoke to no one else, without the formal distance of a monarch addressing a subject. And Elowyn, despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain her silence, found herself responding with the same honesty he offered her. It was during one of these visits that the archive's fragile peace was shattered. Elowyn was cataloging a new shipment of documents when she heard raised voices above, in the main hall. She froze, her hands stilling on the scroll she had been unrolling. Shouting was not uncommon in the keep. Wolves were a passionate people, quick to anger and slow to forgive. But this was different. There was a note of panic in the sound, a raw edge of fear that made her skin prickle. She moved to the grated ceiling and peered up through the iron lattice. She could see figures moving in the hall above, shadows flickering in the torchlight. Then the heavy tread of boots, many of them, moving with purpose. The door to the archive slammed open. Elowyn spun around to find Torvin standing in the doorway, his face flushed, his eyes hard. "You!" he barked. "Come with me, now!" Elowyn's heart began to pound. "What is this about?" "Do not question me, human. Move!" She had no choice. She climbed the stairs from the vault, emerging into the main hall to find it filled with guards. At the center of the chaos stood Elder Morvayn, the High Priestess of the Northern Council, her white robes stark against the darkness of her skin, her eyes like chips of ice. Beside her stood Captain Aldrich, the head of the Royal Guard, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, and bound in iron chains, kneeling on the cold stone floor, was a young woman Elowyn had never seen before. She was human, barely 20, her face bruised and swollen, her clothes torn and filthy. She wept silently, her shoulders shaking, her head bowed. "What is happening?" Elowyn demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Morvayn's gaze swung to her, cold and assessing. This woman was found in the king's private chambers. She claims she was summoned there, invited. Elowyn's stomach dropped. "That is impossible. The king would never—" "The king is not here to defend himself," Morvayn interrupted. "He is in the Eastern Territories, overseeing the final arrangements for his wedding, which makes this woman's story all the more troubling." She stepped closer to Elowyn, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She claimed she was brought to the keep by a member of the royal household, someone with access to the king's chambers, someone who knew the guard rotations, someone who wanted to compromise the king's reputation before his marriage. "And you think I had something to do with this?" Elowyn said, incredulous. "You are the only human with unrestricted access to the keep's private areas," Captain Aldrich said, his tone flat. "You move through the halls at all hours. You have keys to rooms most of the staff have never seen, and you have been observed speaking privately with His Majesty on multiple occasions." Elowyn felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This was a trap. Someone had orchestrated this, had planted this woman and woven a narrative designed to implicate Elowyn in a crime she had not committed. But who? And why? "I have done nothing wrong," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I serve the king by maintaining the archives. I have never set foot in his private chambers. I have never conspired against him." "Then you will not object to being questioned," Morvayn said smoothly. "Under truth-binding." Elowyn's blood ran cold. Truth-binding was a form of magical interrogation used by the council to extract confessions. It involved ritualistic scarring and the invocation of ancient spirits, and it was known to leave permanent damage on the mind of the subject. Humans were particularly vulnerable to its effects. "You cannot," Elowyn whispered. "The law forbids the use of truth-binding on humans without the king's direct consent." "The king is not here," Morvayn said again, her smile thin and cruel. "And in his absence, the council has the authority to act in the interest of the crown. Guards, take her." Strong hands seized Elowyn's arms, dragging her forward. She struggled instinctively, her mind racing, her heart hammering in her chest. This could not be happening. She had been careful, had kept her distance, had done nothing to warrant suspicion. But as the guards forced her to her knees beside the weeping woman, she understood with terrible clarity that her guilt or innocence did not matter. She was human, she was expendable, and someone had decided she was a threat. The ritual chamber was deep beneath the keep, carved from black stone and lit by braziers that burned with a sickly green flame. Elowen was dragged down the winding stairs, her wrists bound, her mind numb with shock. The air grew colder as they descended, thick with the smell of incense and old blood. Morvain waited for her at the center of the chamber, flanked by two other priestesses whose names Elowen did not know. They wore ceremonial masks carved from bone, their robes embroidered with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. "Strip her," Morvain ordered. Elowen tried to resist, but the guards were merciless. They tore her clothes away, leaving her shivering and exposed on the cold stone floor. Shame burned through her, hotter than fear. As the priestesses circled her, their chanting low and rhythmic, Morvain knelt beside her, holding a blade that gleamed with unnatural light. "This will hurt," she said, almost conversationally. "But if you are innocent, the spirits will know. And if you are guilty?" She smiled. "Well, the spirits are not kind to liars." The blade descended. Pain exploded through Elowen's body as the priestess carved the binding runes into her skin, each cut precise and deliberate. She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, echoing off the stone walls. The chanting grew louder, the words alien and terrible, and Elowen felt something cold and invasive slither into her mind, prying at her thoughts, demanding answers. She tried to fight it, tried to hold on to herself, but the magic was relentless. It pulled at her memories, dragging them to the surface. The conversations with Raiden, the touch of his hand on her face, the way her heart had raced when he looked at her. The spirit seized on those moments, twisting them, shaping them into something dark and accusatory. "Confess," Morvain hissed. "Confess your treason." "I have done nothing," Elowen gasped, blood running down her arms, her vision swimming. "I swear it. I have done nothing." But the magic did not care about truth. It cared only about perception, about the narrative that had already been written. And as the pain reached a crescendo, as Elowen felt her mind beginning to fracture under the assault, she understood that she was going to die here, in this chamber, her name erased from history, her body discarded like refuse. Then the door to the chamber exploded inward. The sound was deafening. A concussive blast that sent the priestesses stumbling back, their chanting cut off mid-word. Through the smoke and debris, a figure emerged, massive and terrifying, his eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to set the very air on fire. Raiden. He crossed the chamber in 3 strides, his hand closing around Morvain's throat and lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. "You dare," he snarled, his voice more wolf than man. "You dare lay hands on her without my consent?" Morvain choked, her hands clawing at his grip. "Your Majesty! The Council—" "Damn the Council!" Raiden hurled her aside, and she hit the wall with a sickening crack. The other priestesses fled, their masks falling away, their bravado shattered. The guards stood frozen, their faces pale, as Raiden turned to where Elowen lay on the floor, her body broken and bleeding. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he reached for her. "Elowen," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Gods! What have they done to you?" Elowen tried to speak, but no words came. The magic had stolen her voice, her strength, everything but the pain. She looked up at him, at the anguish in his eyes, and felt something in her chest break apart. Raiden gathered her into his arms, his touch impossibly gentle, and stood. "If she dies," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber like a death sentence, "I will burn this entire keep to the ground, and I will start with the council." Then he carried her up the stairs, away from the darkness, toward the light. Elowen woke to warmth. It was such a foreign sensation that for a long moment she thought she was dreaming, or dead, or caught in some fever vision conjured by the remnants of the binding ritual. But as consciousness slowly returned, bringing with it the sharp awareness of pain, she realized that the warmth was real. She was lying in a bed, a proper bed, not the thin pallet in the archive, wrapped in furs so soft they felt like clouds against her damaged skin. The air smelled of herbs and wood smoke, and somewhere nearby she could hear the crackle of a fire. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her arms and chest where Morvaine's blade had carved the binding runes, and she gasped, her vision swimming. A hand pressed gently against her shoulder, urging her back down. "Do not move," a woman's voice said, low and firm. "The wounds are still fresh. You will tear them open." Elowen turned her head slowly to find an elderly woman sitting beside the bed, her silver hair braided in the traditional style of the pack healers. Her eyes were kind but shrewd, and her hands, though wrinkled with age, moved with practiced efficiency as she checked the bandages wrapped around Elowen's arms. "Where am I?" Elowen whispered, her throat raw. "The king's private chambers," the healer replied, and Elowen's heart stuttered. "Do not look so alarmed, child. His Majesty insisted you be brought here, where you could be properly cared for. I am Marin, chief healer of Blackmore Keep, and you, I am told, are the unfortunate archivist who became a pawn in the Council's power games." Elowen closed her eyes, the memories flooding back, the false accusation, the ritual chamber, the blade cutting into her flesh, and Raiden, appearing like an avenging angel, fury and desperation written across his face. "How long have I been unconscious?" she asked. 3 days, Marin said, wringing out a cloth in a basin of water scented with lavender and something sharper, more medicinal. "The binding ritual nearly killed you. Your mind was fractured, your body in shock. It is a miracle you survived at all." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "Or perhaps not a miracle. His Majesty has been here every night, sitting beside your bed, refusing to leave until I threatened to have him forcibly removed. I have never seen him so undone." Elowen felt something twist in her chest. "I need to speak with him." "You need to rest," Marin said firmly. "The king has more than enough to occupy him at present. The council is in an uproar. Elder Morvaine has been stripped of her position and exiled to the borderlands. 2 of the priestesses who assisted her have been executed. And the woman who was found in the king's chambers has confessed, under far gentler questioning than you endured, that she was hired by Lady Seraphine's household to create a scandal." Elowen stared at her, stunned. "Lady Seraphine? But why would she—" "Because she is not a fool," Marin interrupted. "She has eyes. She has seen the way the king looks at you, the way he speaks of you. She is a woman about to be married to a man who does not love her, and she will not tolerate a rival, no matter how powerless that rival may appear." The healer's expression softened slightly. "You have become a problem, child. A complication in a web of politics you never asked to be part of, and the council will not forgive you for it." Before Elowen could respond, the door to the chamber opened. Marin rose immediately, bowing her head as Raiden entered. He looked haggard, Elowen thought, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He wore simple clothing, a loose tunic and dark trousers, stripped of the formal regalia that usually marked him as king. For a moment, he looked almost human. "Leave us," he said to Marin, his voice rough. The healer hesitated. "Your Majesty, she is still very weak. I will not harm her. Leave us." Marin gathered her supplies and departed, closing the door softly behind her. Raiden stood at the threshold for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Elowen, his hands clenched at his sides. Then he crossed the room and sank into the chair beside the bed, his shoulders bowing as if under a great weight. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful. I should have anticipated that my interest in you would be noticed, that it would be used against you." "You saved my life," Elowen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You stopped them." "I nearly arrived too late." His jaw tightened, and she saw his hands trembling. "When I received word of what the council had done, when I learned that Morvaine had initiated a truth binding without my consent, I rode through the night to get back here. And when I descended into that chamber and saw you—" He broke off, his eyes closing, his breath hitching. "I have seen battle. I have seen men torn apart by claws and fangs. But nothing has ever terrified me the way you did in that moment, lying on that floor, your blood pooling on the stones." Elowen reached out instinctively, her bandaged hand covering his. The touch seemed to ground him, to pull him back from whatever dark place his mind had gone. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and the raw emotion in his gaze stole the breath from her lungs. "Why?" she asked. "Why does it matter to you? I am no one, a human, an archivist. There are 100 women more worthy of your concern." "You think I do not know that?" Ryden said, his voice breaking. "You think I have not told myself the same thing every day since I first spoke to you? You are everything I cannot have, Elowen. Everything the law forbids. And yet I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop seeking you out, talking to you, wanting—" He pulled his hand away, standing abruptly, pacing to the window. "I am a fool. Worse than a fool. I am a king who has allowed his heart to endanger the stability of his kingdom." Elowen sat up slowly, ignoring the pain that flared through her body. "Then let me go. Send me away. Give me a horse and supplies, and I will leave the Highlands. I will disappear, and you can marry Lady Seraphine, and none of this will matter." Ryden spun to face her, his expression fierce. "Do you think I have not considered that? Do you think I have not lain awake at night, planning exactly that? But it is too late, Elowen. The Council knows. Seraphine knows. They will not let you simply walk away. You are a threat now, a symbol of my weakness, my inability to control my own desires. If I send you away, they will hunt you. And if they find you, they will kill you, slowly and painfully to send a message. Then what am I supposed to do?" Elowen demanded, her voice rising. "Live here as your captive? Your guilty secret? How long before they try again? How long before someone else decides I am too dangerous to be allowed to live?" "I do not know," Ryden said, and the admission seemed to cost him. "I do not have an answer. All I know is that I will not let them touch you again. I will not let anyone harm you." He returned to the bedside, kneeling so that they were at eye level. "You asked me once why I came to the archive. I told you it was because you do not lie to me. But that was only part of the truth. Then tell me the rest," Elowen whispered. Ryden reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek. The same gesture he had made in the vault all those weeks ago. But this time, he did not pull away. "I come to you because when I am with you, I remember what it feels like to be more than a crown, more than a weapon, more than a tool for the Council to wield." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and Elowen felt her heart stutter. "You see me, Elowen. Not the king, not the alpha, just me. And I am selfish enough to crave that, even knowing the danger it brings." Elowen's breath caught. She should pull away. She should remind him of the law, of his duty, of the impossibility of what he was suggesting. But instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes closing, her resolve crumbling. "This cannot end well," she said softly. "You know that. I know. They will destroy us both. I know. And yet you are still here. And yet I am still here." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ryden leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin, his hand sliding to the back of her neck. It was not a kiss, not quite, but it was intimate in a way that felt more dangerous, more binding, than any physical touch. "Tell me to leave," he whispered. "Tell me to walk away, and I will. I swear it." Elowen opened her eyes and looked at him, at this king who had everything and nothing, who carried the weight of an entire realm on his shoulders, and still found room to care about one insignificant human woman. And she made a choice that would change both of their lives forever. "Stay," she said. The days that followed were stolen moments, fragile and fleeting. Ryden could not be seen visiting the archive too frequently without raising further suspicion, and Elowen was confined to his chambers until Meryn declared her well enough to move without risk of reopening her wounds. So they existed in a strange liminal space, neither fully together nor apart, bound by circumstance and the watchful eyes of the court. Marin proved to be an unexpected ally. The old healer seemed to understand, in the way that only someone who had lived long and seen much could, that what was growing between Elowen and Raiden was not a simple infatuation. She offered no judgment, only practical advice. "Do not be foolish," she told Elowen one morning as she changed her bandages. "Do not let yourself believe that love is enough to overcome politics. The council will never accept you as queen. The law is absolute, but if you are careful, if you are clever, you may yet carve out a space for yourself in this world." "What kind of space?" Elowen asked bitterly. "As his mistress? His secret shame? As his conscience," Marin said firmly. "As the voice that reminds him he is more than the crown he wears. Do not underestimate the value of that child. Kings are surrounded by sycophants and schemers. To have someone who tells the truth, who demands nothing but honesty in return, that is rarer than gold, more precious than any alliance." Elowen wanted to argue, to insist that she deserved more than to be a footnote in Raiden's life, a hidden chapter in a story that would be written by others. But she was too tired, too broken, to fight. So she nodded and let Marin finish her work, and tried not to think about the future. Raiden came to her that night, as he had every night since she woke. He brought food, real food, not the thin gruel she had subsisted on in the archive. And they ate together in silence, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. "The wedding has been postponed," he said finally, setting down his plate. "Lady Seraphine's involvement in the plot against you has been made public. The Bloodfen Pack is furious, claiming I have dishonored their daughter by accusing her without proof. It is a mess." "Do you have proof?" Elowen asked. "The woman who was planted in my chambers gave a full confession. She named Lady Seraphine's handmaiden as the one who hired her, paid her, and instructed her on what to say. The handmaiden, in turn, has implicated Seraphine herself." Raiden rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "But it does not matter. The damage is done. The alliance is fractured, and the council is using this as an opportunity to question my judgment, my fitness to rule." "Because of me," Elowen said quietly. "Because I refuse to sacrifice you to appease them," Raiden corrected. "They want me to make a public statement condemning you, casting you out as a corrupting influence. They want me to marry Seraphine anyway, to prove that I am still in control, that I can put duty above personal feeling. And what do you want?" Raiden looked at her, his gaze steady and unyielding. "I want to tear down every law that says I cannot choose my own fate. I want to burn the council's edicts and rewrite them in my own hand. I want—" He broke off, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I want you, and I hate myself for it." Elowen felt tears prick at her eyes. "You should hate me instead. I have brought you nothing but trouble." "You have brought me clarity," Raiden said. He rose from his chair and came to sit beside her on the bed, his hand finding hers. "Before you, I was sleepwalking through my life, performing my duty like a trained hound. I told myself it was enough. That service to the crown was all that mattered. But you woke something in me, Elowen. Something I thought had died with my mother, and I cannot go back to that half-life, no matter what it costs. It will cost you everything," Elowen said, her voice breaking. "Your throne, your people, your legacy. Perhaps," Raiden agreed. "Or perhaps it will cost me nothing, because I never truly had those things to begin with. A throne is just a chair, Elowen. A crown is just metal, and a legacy written by others is no legacy at all." He leaned forward and kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that tasted of desperation and defiance. Elowen kissed him back, her hands fisting in his tunic, pulling him closer, kneading the solidity of him. The proof that this was real, that she was not imagining the impossible. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Raiden rested his forehead against hers. "I do not know how to fix this," he admitted. "I do not know how to make the council accept you, or how to change laws that have stood for centuries. But I will find a way. I swear it." Elowen wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that love could be enough, that determination could overcome tradition. But she had lived too long in the shadow of the keep's walls to believe in miracles. just promise me one thing," she said softly. "Anything. When this ends, because it will end, Raiden, we both know it will, promise me you will not let them erase me. Promise me that somewhere, in some record, my name will remain, not as a scandal, not as a mistake, but as someone who mattered, even if only to you." Raiden pulled back, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "It will not end. I will not allow it." But even as he spoke, they both heard the sound of boots in the corridor outside, the sharp rap of knuckles on wood. Raiden rose immediately, his body tense, his hand moving instinctively to where his sword would have been if he were in full armor. "Enter," he called. The door opened to reveal Captain Aldrich, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, the Council has convened an emergency session. They are demanding your presence immediately." "On what grounds?" "They have invoked the right of grievance. Elder Thorn has formally accused you of violating the law of separation." Aldrich's gaze flicked briefly to Elowen, then back to Raiden. "You are to stand trial before the full council at dawn tomorrow." Elowen felt the world tilt. The right of grievance was one of the oldest, most sacred traditions of the Pax. It allowed any member of the council to challenge the Alpha King's decisions if they believed those decisions threatened the stability of the realm. If the challenge was upheld, the king could be stripped of his authority, exiled, or even executed. Raiden's jaw tightened. On what evidence does Thorn base this accusation? Testimony from members of the household staff, witness accounts of your visits to the archive, and... Aldrich hesitated. The healer, Marin, has been subpoenaed to testify regarding the nature of your relationship with the archivist. Elowen's stomach dropped. Marin would not lie, but she would not have to. The truth was damning enough. "I see," Raiden said, his voice cold and controlled. "Tell the council I will attend their tribunal, but make it clear that I will not tolerate any further attempts to harm Elowen. She is under my direct protection, and any who threaten her will answer to me." "Your Majesty," Aldrich said carefully, "with respect, issuing such a decree will only strengthen Thorn's case. It proves that you have placed your personal attachment above the law. I am aware of that, Captain. Deliver my message." Aldrich bowed and departed, leaving Raiden and Elowen alone once more. The silence stretched between them, heavy with dread. "This is it," Elowen said numbly. "This is how it ends." "No." Raiden turned to her, his expression fierce. "This is how it begins. The council wants a trial. I will give them one, but I will not stand before them as a defendant. I will stand as a king who is tired of bowing to archaic laws that serve no one but the fearful and the cruel. Raiden, you cannot... I can. And I will." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the steel in his voice. "Trust me, Elowen. I have spent my entire life preparing to lead. Let me lead now." The trial was held in the Hall of Echoes, a vast chamber deep within the mountain where the voices of the accused and the accusers were said to be carried to the spirits of the ancestors. Elowen was not permitted to attend. She was the subject of the trial, not a participant. But Marin brought her news in whispers, her face pale. "The council is divided," the healer said, wringing her hands. "Elder Thorn and his faction are calling for the king's abdication. They claim he has been compromised by his attachment to you, that he can no longer be trusted to uphold the laws of the pack. But there are others, younger elders mostly, who argue that the law itself is the problem, that it is outdated and unjust." "And Raiden?" Elowen asked, her voice tight with fear. "He stands before them like a king carved from stone," Marin said, and there was something like awe in her voice. "He does not deny his feelings for you. He does not apologize or beg for mercy. Instead, he challenges them. He asks why a law written 500 years ago, born of fear and prejudice, should dictate the choices of a king in the present. He asks what gives them the right to demand he sacrifice his happiness for a tradition that has brought nothing but division and suffering." Elowen closed her eyes, her heart aching. "They will destroy him. Perhaps," Marin said softly, "or perhaps he will destroy them first." The trial lasted 3 days. On the first day, Elder Thorn presented his case, methodically laying out the evidence of Ryden's attachment to Eowyn. He called witnesses, servants who had seen the king descending to the archive late at night, guards who had noticed the change in his demeanor, even the steward Torvin, who testified with barely concealed malice about the increased rations Ryden had ordered for the human archivist. On the second day, Meryn was called to testify. She spoke truthfully but carefully, confirming that Eowyn had been brought to the king's chambers for medical treatment, that Ryden had visited her during her recovery, but refusing to speculate on the nature of their relationship. Thorne pressed her, demanding to know if she believed the king had violated the law of separation. Meryn looked him in the eye and said, "I believe the king has acted with honor and compassion. If that is a crime, then the law is the criminal, not him." The chamber erupted in chaos. On the third day, Ryden spoke. He stood before the council, unarmed and unarmored, wearing the simple black robes of a supplicant rather than the regalia of a king. And he told them the truth. He spoke of his childhood, of watching his mother die slowly while his father withdrew into grief and rage. He spoke of ascending to the throne at 19, carrying the weight of a realm he had not been ready to lead. He spoke of the loneliness of power, the way it isolated him from everyone and everything, until he became more symbol than man. And then he spoke of Eowyn. He did not romanticize their connection or dress it in flowery language. He simply described her as she was, intelligent, resilient, honest. A woman who had survived horrors that would have broken most and still found the strength to speak truth to power. A woman who saw him not as a king to be feared or a prize to be won, but as a person worthy of being known. "I do not ask you to approve," Ryden said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "I do not ask you to bless a union that the law forbids. I ask only that you recognize the hypocrisy of a system that demands I rule with wisdom and compassion, while denying me the very experiences that would teach me those virtues. You want a king who understands his people, who can lead with empathy and strength, but you have built a cage around me, isolated me from the world, and then condemned me for failing to feel what I have never been allowed to know." He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembled elders. "The law of separation was written to prevent the dilution of our bloodlines, to protect the purity of the wolf. But what has it truly protected? It has given us generations of rulers who see humans as lesser, who treat them as tools or threats. It has created a society built on fear and division, and it has ensured that our kings are chosen not for their merit or their character, but for the accident of their birth. You would overthrow centuries of tradition for a human woman?" Elder Thorne demanded, his voice shaking with rage. "I would overthrow tradition for the chance to build something better," Ryden replied. "A realm where humans and wolves can coexist as equals, where laws are judged by their merit, not their age, where a king is measured by his choices, not his bloodline." The chamber fell silent. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice spoke. "And if the council rejects your vision? If we demand you uphold the law and renounce the woman?" Ryden smiled, and it was a cold, terrible thing. "Then I will abdicate. I will walk away from this throne, and you can find another king to rule in my place. But know this, if you force me to choose between the crown and my conscience, I will choose my conscience. Every time." The council erupted once more, elders shouting over each other, their voices rising in a cacophony of fury and fear. But Eowyn, listening from her chamber far above, heard only one thing in Ryden's words. He had chosen her, and in doing so, he had set them both on a path from which there could be no return. The council's decision came at midnight, delivered by a messenger whose hands trembled as he passed the sealed parchment to Captain Aldrich. Eowyn watched from the shadows of Ryden's chambers as the captain read the decree, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finally looked up, his eyes found hers, and she saw something in them she had never expected to see from the stern, duty-bound soldier. Pity. "What does it say?" she asked, though part of her already knew. The weight of inevitability had been pressing down on her chest since the trial began, a suffocating certainty that no amount of courage or defiance could change what was coming. Aldrich did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Ryden, who stood by the window, his back rigid, his hands clasped behind him. "Your Majesty, the council has reached a verdict." "Read it," Ryden said, his voice flat. Aldrich cleared his throat. "By order of the Council of Elders, acting in accordance with the ancient laws of the Northern Pax, King Ryden Blackmore is found in violation of the law of separation. However, in recognition of his service to the realm and the support of a significant faction within the council, he is granted a choice." The captain paused, his jaw tightening. "He may retain his crown on the condition that he publicly renounces Elowen Hart, orders her exile from the Highlands, and proceeds with his marriage to Lady Seraphine Vexmore within the month. Alternatively, he may abdicate the throne, in which case the crown will pass to his cousin, Lord Gareth of the Stormfang Pack, and both he and Elowen will be permitted to leave Blackmore Keep unharmed." The silence that followed was absolute. Elowen felt her knees weaken, and she gripped the back of a chair to keep herself upright. This was the choice, then. The impossible choice. Ryden's throne or his heart, his duty or his desire. And no matter which path he chose, someone would suffer. "How long do I have to decide?" Ryden asked, still not turning from the window. "The council convenes again at dawn," Aldrich replied. "They expect your answer then. Leave us." Aldrich hesitated, his gaze flicking to Elowen once more, then bowed and departed. The door closed with a soft click, and Elowen was alone with the king who had risked everything for her. "You should take the throne," she said quietly, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. "You should marry Seraphine, lead your people, be the king they need. I will go. I will leave the Highlands and never return. It is the only way." Ryden turned slowly, and the look on his face made her heart break. "Do you truly believe I could do that? Do you think I could stand before the council tomorrow and denounce you as if you meant nothing? As if these past weeks have been nothing more than a momentary lapse in judgment? You have to," Elowen said desperately. "Ryden, you were born to rule. Your people need you. The realm needs you. I am just... You are everything." He interrupted, crossing the room in 3 strides and taking her face in his hands. "You are the only thing in this God's forsaken world that has ever made me feel like more than a weapon in the council's arsenal. And if I give you up, if I let them drive you away, I will spend the rest of my life as a hollow shell, playing the role of king while my soul withers to nothing. Better a hollow king than no king at all," Elowen whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Better you on the throne, even if you hate me for it, than your cousin. Gareth is cruel, Ryden. Everyone knows it. He will undo everything your father built, everything you have fought to preserve. Then let him." Ryden's voice was fierce, unyielding. "Let him burn it all to the ground. I am tired of sacrificing myself on the altar of duty. I am tired of being told that my happiness matters less than tradition, that my heart is worth less than a crown." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. "I choose you, Elowen. I will always choose you." "You will regret it," she said, her voice breaking. "One day when we are old and poor and forgotten, you will look at me and wish you had made a different choice." "Never," Ryden said, and kissed her with a desperation that stole the breath from her lungs. It was not gentle, not tentative, but fierce and claiming, a vow written in the language of touch. Elowen kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his tunic, pulling him closer, kneading him in a way that transcended reason or sense. They stumbled toward the bed, still kissing, still clinging to each other as if the world outside the chamber was already dissolving into chaos. Ryden's hands moved to the laces of her gown, fumbling with the ties, and Elowen helped him, her own fingers shaking as she pushed the fabric aside. The scars from Morvaine's blade were still visible on her skin, pale and raised, a permanent reminder of how close she had come to death. Ryden traced them with his fingertips, his expression anguished. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry." "Do not apologize," Elowen said, guiding his hand to her heart. "Not for this, not for us." They made love slowly, carefully, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile and precious. Ryden was gentle despite his size, his touch reverent, and Elowen found herself weeping again, Not from pain, but from the overwhelming intensity of being seen, being wanted, being loved by someone who had every reason to turn away from her and chose not to. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the furs, Ryden's arm wrapped around her waist, his breath warm against her neck. Elowen stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance in the firelight, and tried to memorize this moment. Because no matter what Ryden said, no matter how fiercely he believed in their future, she knew the truth. They were living on borrowed time. Dawn came too quickly. Elowen woke to find Ryden already dressed, standing once more at the window, his expression distant. She rose from the bed, wrapping a fur around her shoulders, and went to stand beside him. Below, the courtyard was already filling with people. Council members, pack representatives, servants, and soldiers, all gathered to witness the king's decision. "You could still change your mind," she said softly. "It is not too late." Ryden shook his head. "My mind was made the moment I carried you out of that ritual chamber. Everything since has simply been confirmation." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "But I need to know that you understand what this means. If I abdicate, we will have nothing. No titles, no protection, no guaranteed safety. We will be exiles, hunted by anyone who sees us as symbols of defiance or simply as easy targets. It will be hard, Elowen, harder than anything you have endured so far." "I know," she said, "and I am ready." He smiled then, a real smile, the first she had seen in days. "Then let us go face them together." They descended to the Hall of Echoes hand in hand, a deliberate provocation that sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. The council members sat in their high seats, their faces ranging from outrage to resignation. Elder Thorn looked triumphant, clearly expecting Ryden to choose the throne. But it was Elder Mira, one of the younger members who had argued in Ryden's defense during the trial, who spoke first. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady. "Have you reached a decision?" Ryden stepped forward, still holding Elowen's hand, and addressed the council with the calm authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. "I have. I hereby renounce my claim to the throne of Fang and Claw. I abdicate my position as Alpha King of the Northern Pacts, effective immediately. The crown passes to Lord Gareth Stormfang, as is his right by blood and by law." The hall erupted in chaos. Voices rose in protest, in approval, in shock. Elder Thorn stood, his face purple with rage. "You would abandon your people for a human? You would throw away centuries of lineage for this nothing?" Ryden's eyes flashed dangerously. "Elowen Hart is not nothing. She is worth more than any crown, more than any throne. And if you cannot see that, then you are the one who is blind, Thorn. Not I. You are a fool," Thorn spat. "Gareth will destroy everything you have built. He will undo your reforms, persecute the humans under our rule, return us to the dark ages of blood and conquest. And it will be your fault." "No," Ryden said quietly. "It will be yours. You and every other elder who chose tradition over justice, fear over progress. You could have accepted change. You could have allowed the law to evolve with the times. Instead, you forced me to choose between my duty and my conscience. And I will not apologize for choosing the latter." He turned to address the crowd, his voice rising. "I know many of you will see this as a betrayal. You may curse my name, strike me from your records, teach your children that I was weak or foolish or corrupt. I cannot stop you. But I hope that some of you, perhaps not today but in time, will understand that the laws we cling to are not sacred. They are tools, meant to serve us, not enslave us. And when a tool no longer serves its purpose, it must be set aside." With that, he removed the heavy silver ring that marked him as Alpha King and placed it on the council table. Then he took Elowen's hand once more and led her toward the doors of the hall. They had almost reached the exit when a voice called out, young and uncertain, "Your Majesty." "Wait." Ryden paused and turned. A boy of no more than 15 stood in the crowd, his clothes marking him as a servant, his eyes wide and earnest. "What should we do? If Gareth is as bad as they say, what should we do?" Ryden looked at the boy for a long moment, then smiled sadly. You survive. You resist when you can, endure when you must, and remember that even the darkest night eventually gives way to dawn. And when the time comes for you to make your own choices, choose wisely. Choose with your whole heart, because that is the only way to live a life worth living. Then he turned and walked out of the Hall of Echoes, leaving behind the only life he had ever known. They were given 3 days to leave Blackmore Keep. Maren helped Elowen pack what few belongings she possessed, her expression a mixture of sorrow and approval. "You are braver than I gave you credit for," the old healer said, pressing a small leather pouch into Elowen's hands. "Herbs for pain, for fever, for infection. The road will be hard. Take care of each other." "Thank you," Elowen said, embracing the woman who had shown her more kindness than she deserved. "For everything." "Do not thank me yet," Maren said grimly. "The council may have promised you safe passage, but there are many between here and the borderlands who will not honor that promise. Gareth supporters in particular will see you as a threat to the new king's legitimacy. Watch your backs." Ryden, meanwhile, was making his own preparations. He had been stripped of his title but not his training, and he gathered weapons, supplies, and a pair of sturdy horses with the efficiency of a man who had planned military campaigns. Captain Aldrich helped him, though the older soldier said little, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. "I am sorry," Aldrich said finally as they loaded the last of the packs. "I should have spoken in your defense during the trial. I should have—" "You did your duty," Ryden interrupted. "I do not fault you for that. Your father would be ashamed of me. My father would be proud of you for putting the realm above personal loyalty. That is what he taught us both." Ryden gripped the captain's shoulder. "Protect them, Aldrich. The humans, the weak, the ones who cannot protect themselves. Gareth will not, but you can." Aldrich nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I will. I swear it." On the morning of their departure, the courtyard was nearly empty. Most of the court had already shifted their allegiance to Gareth, who had arrived the previous day with an entourage of Stormfang warriors and wasted no time asserting his authority. Elowen caught a glimpse of him as she and Ryden led their horses toward the gates, a tall, broad man with cruel eyes and a smile that promised pain. "Do not look at him," Ryden murmured, his hand tightening on her arm. "He is not worth your attention." They rode through the gates of Blackmore Keep as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Elowen did not look back. She kept her eyes forward, on the road ahead, on the unknown future that stretched before them. But she could feel the weight of the keep at her back, the judgment of the watchers on the walls, the whispers that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The road south was treacherous, winding through mountain passes where the wind howled like a living thing, and the snow fell so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Ryden led the way with the confidence of someone who had traveled these paths before, but even he struggled at times, his horse slipping on ice-slicked stones, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the altitude pressed down on them. Elowen fared worse. She was not accustomed to riding for long hours, and her body, still recovering from the trauma of the binding ritual, protested every mile. But she did not complain. She clenched her teeth against the pain and kept moving, determined not to be the reason they failed. They stopped each night in whatever shelter they could find, a cave, an abandoned hunter's cabin, once just a cluster of boulders that provided minimal protection from the wind. Ryden built fires and cooked their meager rations, and they huddled together for warmth, too exhausted for conversation. On the 5th night, they reached the edge of the highlands, where the mountains gave way to rolling foothills and dense forests. Ryden found a small clearing beside a stream and declared they would rest there for a day, to let the horses recover and to tend to Elowen's worsening cough. "You are burning up," he said, pressing his hand to her forehead. "The cold has gotten into your lungs." "I am fine," Elowen lied, though her chest felt tight and every breath was a struggle. "You are not fine." Ryden rummaged through their packs and pulled out Maren's pouch of herbs. He brewed a tea over the fire, bitter and strong, and made Elowen drink it despite her protests. Then he wrapped her in every blanket they had and held her close, his body a furnace against the chill that seemed to have settled into her bones. I am sorry, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I am slowing us down. You are doing no such thing, Raiden said firmly. We are not racing anyone. We have time. But they both knew that was not entirely true. Even here, on the edge of the highlands, they were not safe. Gareth's influence extended far, and there were those who would gladly turn them over to the new king in exchange for favor or coin. Elowen drifted in and out of feverish sleep, her dreams filled with fragments of the past. Her parents' faces, the smell of smoke, Morvaine's blade carving into her flesh. She woke several times to find Raiden still awake, his eyes scanning the darkness, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Sleep, she murmured. You need rest too. I will rest when you are well, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Not before. By morning, the fever had broken, and though Elowen was still weak, she felt well enough to continue. They packed up their camp and set off again, following the stream south toward the lowlands. It was midday when they encountered the riders. There were 5 of them, armed and armored, bearing the sigil of the Stormfang pack on their cloaks. They blocked the path ahead, their horses stamping restlessly, their expressions hard. Raiden reined in his horse, his body tense, his hand moving to his sword. Let us pass, he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The leader of the group, a scarred man with graying hair, sneered. King Gareth sends his regards. He thought you might appreciate an escort to the border, to ensure you do not lose your way. We do not need an escort, Raiden said. The council granted us safe passage. The council does not rule here, the man said. King Gareth does. And he is not as trusting as the old council. He wants to make sure you leave the highlands and never return. Consider this a courtesy. And if we refuse? Elowen asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. The man's smile widened. Then we will be forced to insist. Raiden's jaw tightened. He looked at Elowen, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. They were outnumbered, outarmed, and Elowen was still too weak to fight. Resisting would only get them killed. Very well, Raiden said finally. Lead the way. The men surrounded them, boxing them in, and Elowen felt the trap closing. This was not an escort. This was a death march. And when they reached the border, if they reached the border, she had no doubt that Gareth's men would ensure they never crossed it alive. But Raiden's hand found hers as they rode, his grip strong and steady, and she drew strength from that touch. They had come this far. They would find a way through this, too. They had to. The journey to the border took 2 more days, and with each mile the tension grew thicker. The Stormfang soldiers were not overtly hostile, but their presence was a constant reminder that Raiden and Elowen were no longer free. They were prisoners in all but name, being herded toward an uncertain fate. On the second night, as they made camp in a shallow valley, Raiden managed to pull Elowen aside, away from the watchful eyes of their captors. Listen to me, he said quietly, his voice urgent. When we reach the border, there will be a moment, a brief window, when they will be distracted. When that happens, I need you to run. Take one of the horses and ride south as fast as you can. Do not stop. Do not look back. Find the nearest village and tell them you are seeking sanctuary. Use my mother's name if you must. There are still those who remember her kindness. And what about you? Elowen demanded, her heart pounding. I will hold them off. Buy you time. No. Elowen gripped his arm, her nails digging into his skin. I will not leave you. You do not have a choice, Raiden said, his voice breaking. If they kill us both, then everything we sacrificed was for nothing. But if you survive, if you escape, then there is still hope. Hope that our story will not end in this God's forsaken valley. Hope that one day, someone will remember that we tried to change things. I do not care about hope, Elowen said fiercely. I care about you, and I will not abandon you to die alone. Raiden pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it hurt. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. And I love you for it. But please, Elowen, please, give me this. Let me protect you, just this once. Elowen wanted to argue, to insist that they would find another way, that they would survive this together. But before she could speak, one of the soldiers called out, ordering them back to the fire. The moment was lost. That night, Eowyn lay awake in Ryden's arms, listening to the sound of his heartbeat, memorizing the feel of his body against hers. She knew he was right. She knew that if they fought, they would both die. But the thought of running, of leaving him behind, was unbearable. So she made a different plan. The border crossing was a narrow bridge spanning a deep gorge, the river below churning white with rapids. The Stormfang soldiers stopped at the near side of the bridge, their leader dismounting and approaching Ryden with a mocking bow. "This is where we part ways, former majesty," he said. "The bridge marks the edge of the highlands. Once you cross, you are no longer our concern. Of course, there is the matter of your weapons." King Gareth was very clear that exiles are not permitted to carry arms. The council's decree said nothing about disarmament, Ryden said coldly. "The council's decree is not worth the parchment it is written on," the man replied. "Now, your sword, and the lady's dagger, unless you would prefer we take them by force." Ryden's hand moved to his sword, and for a moment, Eowyn thought he would refuse. But then he slowly drew the blade and handed it over, his expression carefully blank. Eowyn did the same with the small knife Meryn had given her. "Good," the soldier said, tossing the weapons aside. "Now cross, and if we ever see you in the Highlands again, there will be no trial, no counsel, no mercy, just a swift death. Do you understand?" "Perfectly," Ryden said. He took Eowyn's hand and led her toward the bridge. Behind them, she could hear the soldiers laughing, making crude jokes about the fallen king and his human whore. Eowyn's jaw tightened, but she kept moving, her eyes fixed on the far side of the gorge. They were halfway across when the first arrow struck the wooden planks at their feet. Eowyn gasped, stumbling, and Ryden caught her, his eyes wide with shock. He spun around to see the soldiers knocking more arrows, their expressions gleeful. "I lied," the leader called out. "There is no safe passage. King Gareth wants you dead, and we are happy to oblige." The next volley came fast, a hail of arrows that forced Ryden and Eowyn to drop to the ground, pressing themselves flat against the bridge. Ryden covered her body with his, shielding her as best he could, and Eowyn felt the thud of an arrow embedding itself in the wood inches from her head. "We have to move!" Ryden shouted over the noise. He pulled her to her feet and they ran, stumbling and slipping on the rain-slick planks as more arrows flew past them. One grazed Ryden's shoulder, tearing through his cloak and drawing blood. Another struck the railing, shattering the wood. They reached the far side of the bridge just as the soldiers began to cross, their swords drawn, their intent clear. Ryden looked around desperately, searching for anything they could use as a weapon, and his eyes landed on a stack of fallen logs near the edge of the gorge. "Help me," he said, grabbing one of the logs and dragging it toward the bridge. Eowyn understood immediately. Together, they heaved the log onto the bridge, then another and another, creating a makeshift barricade. The soldiers slowed, forced to climb over the obstruction, and in that brief moment, Ryden seized a thick branch from the ground and swung it like a club, catching the first soldier across the jaw and sending him sprawling. The fight was brutal and desperate. Ryden fought with the skill of a trained warrior, but he was unarmed and outnumbered, and the soldiers pressed him relentlessly. Eowyn grabbed a rock and hurled it at one of the men, striking him in the temple and buying Ryden a few precious seconds. But it was not enough. A blade slashed across Ryden's chest and he staggered, blood pouring from the wound. Eowyn screamed, rushing to his side, and felt hands grab her from behind, dragging her away. She struggled, kicking and clawing, but the soldier holding her was too strong. "Let her go!" Ryden roared, and there was something in his voice that was no longer human. His eyes flashed amber, his body convulsing, and Eowyn realized with a jolt of shock that he was shifting. The transformation was agonizing to watch. Bones cracked and reformed, muscles rippled and expanded, and within moments, Ryden was no longer a man, but a massive black wolf, his fur sleek and dark, his eyes burning with primal fury. He tore into the soldiers with savage efficiency, his jaws closing around throats, his claws rending flesh. The men fell back, terror replacing their arrogance, and within minutes, the bridge was littered with bodies. The soldier holding Eowyn released her and fled, his screams echoing through the gorge. Eowyn collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as the wolf that had been Rydon turned to face her. For a moment, she was afraid. The creature before her was nothing like the man she loved. It was wild, feral, a predator born of violence and instinct. But then the wolf approached slowly, its head lowered, and she saw the intelligence in its eyes, the recognition. "Rydon," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. The wolf nuzzled her palm, a low whine escaping its throat. And Eowyn understood that he was still in there, still fighting to hold on to himself despite the beast that now controlled his body. She wrapped her arms around the wolf's neck, burying her face in its fur, and wept. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived. But as she held him, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath the thick pelt, she knew that their journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The transformation back to human form left Rydon collapsed on the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion, his chest still bleeding from the sword wound. Eowyn tore strips from her cloak and pressed them against the gash, her hands shaking as she tried to stem the flow of blood. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Rydon, stay with me." He opened his eyes, gray and clouded with pain, and managed a weak smile. "I told you, I would protect you." "You are an idiot," Eowyn said, tears streaming down her face. "A brave, reckless idiot. And you are still here. I told you to run. I do not take orders well. You should know that by now." Despite the pain, despite everything, Rydon laughed, a raw, breathless sound that turned into a cough. Blood flecked his lips, and Eowyn's heart clenched with fear. The wound was deep, possibly mortal, and they had no supplies, no healer, nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hostile wilderness stretching endlessly around them. She looked at the bridge behind them, at the bodies of the Stormfang soldiers lying broken and still. They could not stay here. More would come, drawn by the sounds of fighting, or by the failure of the first group to report back. They had to move, had to find shelter, had to survive long enough to figure out what came next. "Can you stand?" she asked. Rydon nodded, though the effort it took him to rise was evident in every labored breath. Eowyn wrapped his arm around her shoulders, taking as much of his weight as her smaller frame could bear, and together they stumbled away from the bridge, into the dense forest that marked the beginning of the lowlands. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination. Eowyn guided them deeper into the woods, away from any paths or roads where they might be found. Rydon's condition worsened with each step, his skin growing clammy, his breathing shallow. She knew he was losing too much blood, knew that without proper treatment he would not survive the night. As dusk began to fall, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and deep red, Eowyn spotted a structure through the trees. A small cottage, half hidden by overgrown vines and surrounded by a wild garden. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray thread against the darkening sky. "There," she said, hope flaring in her chest. "We can ask for help." Rydon tried to protest, tried to warn her that approaching strangers was dangerous, but he no longer had the strength. Eowyn half carried, half dragged him to the cottage door and knocked, her fist pounding against the weathered wood with desperate urgency. The door opened to reveal an old woman, her face lined with age, her eyes sharp and assessing. She took in the sight of them, Rydon bleeding and barely conscious, Eowyn disheveled and exhausted, and her expression shifted from suspicion to something that might have been understanding. "Please," Eowyn said, her voice cracking. "Please help us. He is dying." The woman studied them for a long moment, her gaze lingering on Rydon's face, and then she stepped aside. "Bring him in. Quickly." The cottage was small but clean, filled with the scent of herbs and wood smoke. The old woman directed Eowyn to lay Rydon on a narrow bed in the corner, then set about gathering supplies, clean cloth, jars of salve, a needle and thread. She worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who had tended wounds before, many times, and did not flinch at the severity of Ryden's injury. "This will hurt," she said, threading the needle. "Hold him down." Elowin pressed her hands against Ryden's shoulders as the old woman began to stitch the wound closed. He arched against the pain, a strangled sound tearing from his throat, but Elowin held him firm, murmuring words of comfort that she was not sure he could even hear. When it was done, the woman applied a thick green salve to the wound and wrapped it in fresh bandages. She stood back, wiping her bloodied hands on a rag, and looked at Elowin with eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. "He will live," she said, "if infection does not set in, but he needs rest, warmth, and food. You both do." "Thank you," Elowin said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know how to repay you." "You can start by telling me who you are running from," the woman said, settling into a chair by the fire, "and why a human woman is traveling with a wolf who smells of royalty." Elowin froze. "I do not know what you mean." The old woman smiled, and it was not unkind. "Child, I have lived in these woods for 60 years. I know the scent of the Highland packs, and I know the bearing of those who were born to rule. Your companion is, or was, someone important, and you are either very brave or very foolish to have tied your fate to his." Elowin hesitated, weighing her options. She could lie, could invent some story about bandits or accidents, but something in the woman's eyes told her that dishonesty would not be welcome here. "His name is Ryden," she said finally. "He was the Alpha King of the Northern Packs. He abdicated his throne to be with me, and now the new king wants us dead. We are trying to reach the Southern Territories, where we might find sanctuary." The old woman was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she rose and went to a shelf, pulling down a dusty volume bound in leather. She opened it and turned the pages until she found what she was looking for: a drawing, faded with age, of a woman with kind eyes and a crown of silver leaves. "Queen Leora," the woman said softly. "I knew her many years ago, before she married into the Blackmore line. She used to visit these woods, seeking herbs and wisdom from those of us who lived outside the pack's reach. She was a good woman, compassionate, wise." She looked up at Elowin. "If Ryden is her son, then he carries her spirit. And if he chose you, then there is more to you than meets the eye." Elowin felt tears prick at her eyes. "I am no one. Just a human who happened to survive when others did not. Survival is its own kind of strength," the woman said. "And it seems to me that you have survived a great deal." She closed the book and set it aside. "You may stay here until he is well enough to travel, but know this: the new king's reach is long, and there are those in the lowlands who would sell you to him for a handful of coin. Trust no one, and keep moving. The Southern Territories are your best hope, but the journey will not be easy." "Nothing about this has been easy," Elowin said quietly. "No," the woman agreed. "But that is the nature of love, is it not? It demands everything and promises nothing, and yet we choose it anyway." Ryden slept for 2 days, his body fighting off the trauma of the wound and the transformation. Elowin stayed by his side, refusing to leave even to eat or rest. The old woman, who introduced herself as Alara, brought her food and tea, and spoke to her in low tones about the land beyond the cottage, the villages and towns that dotted the lowlands, the dangers they would face. "There are those who still remember the old ways," Ilara said. "Those who believe that humans and wolves should not mix, that the law of separation is sacred. They will not help you. But there are others, rebels, outcasts, those who have suffered under the pack's rule, who might offer aid if you can find them." "How do we find them?" Elowin asked. Ilara reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out a small carved token, a wolf and a human figure intertwined. "This is the symbol of the unbound, those who reject the old laws and seek a new way. Show this in the right places, and you may find allies. But be careful. Not everyone who claims to be unbound is trustworthy." Elowin took the token, feeling its weight in her palm. "Why are you helping us?" "Because I am old, and I have seen too much suffering born of fear and tradition," Alara said. "And because Queen Leora once saved my daughter's life." when no one else would. I owe her memory a debt. Consider this payment." On the third day, Ryden woke. His eyes were clear, the fever gone, though he was still weak. Elowen helped him sit up, supporting him as he drank the broth Alara had prepared. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Safe," Elowen said. "For now." He looked around the cottage, taking in Alara's presence, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "You found help." "She found us," Elowen corrected, "and she is an old friend of your mother's." Ryden's gaze shifted to Alara, and something softened in his expression. "Thank you for saving us, for honoring her memory." Alara inclined her head. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. I see much of her in you." She paused. "But you must leave soon. The longer you stay in one place, the greater the danger. I will give you what supplies I can, but after that, you are on your own." "We understand," Ryden said. They left the cottage 3 days later, their packs filled with food, medicine, and the token Alara had given them. Ryden was still recovering, his movements slow and careful, but he insisted he was strong enough to travel. Elowen did not argue. She knew they had already stayed too long. As they walked away from the cottage, Elowen looked back to see Alara standing in the doorway, her hand raised in farewell. Then the forest swallowed them, and the old woman was gone. The journey south took weeks. They moved cautiously, avoiding main roads and populated areas, surviving on what they could forage or hunt. Ryden taught Elowen how to set snares, how to read the signs of the forest, how to move without leaving tracks. And slowly, she grew stronger, more capable, less the frightened archivist who had cowered in the keep, and more a woman who could survive in the wild. They encountered the Unbound for the first time in a small village nestled in the shadow of a ruined castle. Elowen showed the token to a blacksmith who eyed them warily, and after a tense moment, he nodded and led them to a hidden cellar beneath his forge. There, they found a group of perhaps 20 people, humans and wolves alike, all bearing the scars of persecution or exile. The leader was a woman named Kara, a wolf with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. "So you are the fallen king," Kara said, studying Ryden with open curiosity. "We have heard stories. Some say you are a coward who abandoned your people. Others say you are a hero who chose love over power." "Which is true?" "Both," Ryden said, "and neither. I am simply a man who made a choice. Whether it was the right one remains to be seen." Kara smiled, a sharp, knowing expression. "Honest. I like that." She turned to Elowen. "And you are the human who stole the king's heart. They say you are a witch, a seductress, a demon in disguise." "They say many things about me," Elowen replied evenly. "Most of them are lies. I am simply a woman who refused to let fear dictate her life. Also honest." Kara's smile widened. "You will do well here. We can offer you shelter, food, and information. In exchange, we ask that you share what you know about the new king, about the state of the Highlands, about the council's plans." Ryden and Elowen exchanged a glance, then nodded. They stayed with the Unbound for a month, sharing what intelligence they had and learning in turn about the growing resistance movement spreading through the lowlands. It was a fragile network, held together by shared grievances and hope for change, but it was something. And in those weeks, Elowen began to see the shape of a future that had seemed impossible before. Not a future of thrones and crowns, but one of community, of people working together to build something new from the ruins of the old. But peace, as always, was temporary. Word reached them that Gareth had sent hunters into the lowlands, tracking Ryden and Elowen with ruthless efficiency. The Unbound scattered, going to ground, and Kara urged Ryden and Elowen to flee farther south, to the free cities beyond the reach of the Highland packs. "You have become symbols," Kara said, "whether you want to be or not, and symbols are dangerous. They inspire hope, but they also draw enemies. Go. Live. And when the time is right, when we are strong enough, we will call on you again." So they ran once more, deeper into the south, until they reached the coast and the city of Whitehaven. a sprawling port where humans and wolves lived in uneasy coexistence, governed not by pack law, but by a council of merchants and guild masters. There, they found work. Raiden used his skills as a warrior to hire on as a guard for trading caravans. Ellawen found employment as a scribe, her talent for languages and record-keeping in high demand among the merchant houses. They lived simply, in a small room above a tavern, and for the first time in their lives, they were truly free. But freedom came with its own burdens. Raiden struggled with the loss of his identity, the weight of knowing that he had abandoned his people to Gareth's cruelty. Ellawen saw it in the way he stared out at the sea at night, his expression haunted, his hands clenched into fists. "You are thinking about going back," she said one evening, joining him on the balcony. "I cannot stop thinking about it," Raiden admitted. "Every night I dream of the Highlands. I see Gareth's face, hear the screams of those he is hurting, and I know that I could have prevented it if I had only been stronger, if I had only found another way." "There was no other way," Ellawen said firmly. "The council would never have accepted me. They would have killed me, and then they would have controlled you, used you as a puppet to justify their own power. You made the only choice that allowed us both to survive. But at what cost?" Raiden turned to her, his eyes blazing. "How many have died because I was not there to protect them? How many will die before someone stops him?" "I do not know," Ellawen said quietly. "But I know that you cannot carry that guilt alone. You are one man, Raiden, not a god, not invincible, and you have already sacrificed more than anyone should have to." Raiden pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "But some days, I wonder if that love is worth the price we have both paid." "It is," Ellawen said fiercely. "It has to be, because if it is not, then what was the point of any of this?" They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, and Ellawen felt the weight of their shared grief pressing down on them. But beneath it, there was also something else, a stubborn, defiant hope that refused to die. Months passed, then a year, and then, one day, a messenger arrived at their door. It was Kara, travel-worn and bearing news that made Ellawen's blood run cold. Gareth's rule had descended into tyranny. He had begun purging the Highlands of anyone he deemed a threat. Humans, dissidents, even wolves who questioned his authority. The resistance had grown in response, but they were disorganized, leaderless, desperate. "We need you," Kara said, looking directly at Raiden. "Both of you. The people are ready to fight, but they need someone to rally behind, someone they trust, someone who represents what we are fighting for." "I am not their king anymore," Raiden said. "No," Kara agreed. "You are something better. You are proof that change is possible, that love can triumph over fear, that the old ways do not have to define us." She paused. "We are not asking you to reclaim the throne. We are asking you to stand with us, to lend your voice to the cause, to help us build something new." Raiden looked at Ellawen, and she saw the question in his eyes. This was the choice again. Safety or justice? Peace or purpose? "What do you want to do?" he asked. Ellawen thought about the archivist she had been, the woman who had hidden in the shadows, recording history but never shaping it. And she thought about who she had become, a survivor, a fighter, someone who had learned that silence was not safety, but complicity. "I want to go back," she said. "I want to fight. Not for a throne or a crown, but for the right of people to choose their own fate. For the world your mother believed in. For us." Raiden smiled, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him in months. "Then we go back." They returned to the Highlands in the dead of winter, when the snow lay thick on the ground and the wolves were least expecting an attack. The resistance had grown in their absence, swelling to hundreds of fighters drawn from every pack and every corner of the realm. And when Raiden and Ellawen walked into the camp, when they stood before the assembled rebels, a roar went up that shook the mountains. The war that followed was brutal and bloody. Gareth did not surrender easily, and his loyalists fought with the desperation of those who knew they faced execution if they lost. But the resistance had something Gareth's forces did not: belief in a cause greater than themselves. Eowyn fought alongside Raiden, not as a warrior, but as a strategist, using her knowledge of the keep's layout, the council's protocols, the weaknesses in Gareth's regime. She became the voice of the resistance, writing manifestos that spread through the Highlands like wildfire, calling for an end to the law of separation and the creation of a new society built on equality and choice. The final battle took place at Blackmoor Keep, the very place where Eowyn's nightmare had begun. Gareth had barricaded himself inside, confident that the thick walls would protect him. But Raiden knew those walls, knew every secret passage and hidden entrance, and he led the resistance through them, straight into the heart of the keep. The fight was fierce, but it was also swift. Gareth, for all his cruelty, was not a tactician. He relied on brute force and fear, and when faced with an organized, determined enemy, his defenses crumbled. Raiden found him in the throne room, standing before the throne of Fang and Claw, his sword drawn, his eyes wild. They fought, and it was a clash of ideologies as much as blades. The old world against the new, tradition against progress, fear against hope. In the end, Raiden disarmed him, sending Gareth's sword clattering across the floor. He stood over his cousin, his blade at Gareth's throat, and for a moment, Eowyn thought he would kill him. But Raiden lowered his sword. "You do not deserve a quick death," he said. "You deserve to live with what you have done, to see the world you tried to preserve crumble into dust." Gareth was taken into custody, and the keep fell to the resistance. And in the Hall of Echoes, where Raiden had once renounced his crown, a new council was formed, not of elders chosen by blood, but of representatives elected by the people, humans and wolves alike, working together to forge a new path. Raiden did not reclaim the throne. He refused it, just as he had promised. Instead, he became an advisor to the new council, using his experience to guide without dominating, to serve without ruling. And Eowyn stood beside him, not as a queen, but as an equal, a partner, a voice for those who had been silenced for too long. Years later, when historians recorded the story of the Unbound Rebellion, they would write of King Raiden the Reformer and Eowyn the Wise. They would speak of the love that had sparked a revolution, the sacrifice that had redeemed a throne, the courage that had changed a world. But in the quiet moments, away from the grand narratives and the monuments, Raiden and Eowyn knew the truth. They were not heroes. They were simply two people who had refused to accept that love was not enough, that tradition could not be challenged, that change was impossible. They had chosen each other, again and again, in the face of every obstacle. And in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to love without fear, to fight without certainty, and to believe that a better world is possible. On a spring morning, 5 years after the rebellion's victory, Eowyn stood in the archive of Blackmoor Keep, rebuilt, reopened, and now accessible to all who sought knowledge. She was older now, lines etched around her eyes, silver threading through her hair. But her hands were steady as she opened a new volume, blank and waiting to be filled. Raiden found her there, as he so often did, and smiled. "What are you writing?" "Our story," Eowyn said, "so that future generations will know it was not destiny or prophecy or fate that changed the world. It was choice, and love, and the stubborn refusal to accept that things must always be as they have always been." Raiden leaned over her shoulder, reading the first line she had written. The fire had long since died when Eowyn woke to the sound of iron scraping against stone. He kissed the top of her head. "A good beginning, and a better ending," Eowyn said, taking his hand. "Because it is not really an ending at all, just the start of something new." Together, they walked out of the archive and into the sunlight, leaving behind the shadows of the past and stepping into the future they had fought so hard to create. A future where love was not forbidden, where choice was sacred, and where the world belonged to all who had the courage to claim it.